Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Joachim Sanden, and I extend a heartily felt welcome to you all. Guten Morgen, meine Damen und Herren. Herzlich willkommen zu unserer Veranstaltung. It's the first time that the German Armed Forces Reservists Association will have the opportunity to host such a side event. We are very grateful that Ambassador Ischinger and his staff, namely CEO Dr. Benedikt Franke, provide us this opportunity. As you all know, we are living in a difficult period of time. For instance, facing the COVID pandemic, and we're even more importantly, large numbers of Russian troops being posted at the premises of the Ukrainian border, ready for an invasion. Today, we would like to change the focus of the discussion a little bit towards the question, how is resilience in a society and its armed forces achieved? Resilience as a term is used by scientists, for instance, in psychology, sociology, in physics, and in medical science. Resilient means, in other words, the ability to overcome difficult situations as a person or a community and to make provisions to better survive similar challenges in the future. Resilience is, to our understanding, a key factor as important in managing a crisis as, for instance, technical equipment, weapon systems, and numbers of personnel employed. Moreover, since the first days NATO was founded, resilience against an outward enemy is in the genes of NATO. Recent crisis situations in Germany and in other countries as well demonstrated that reserve forces may take an important and may make an important contribution to the value and efficiency of armed forces. Our special interest today is to talk and discuss the topic battlefield resilience, the reserve as necessary support for armed forces. We feel honored and pleased that we have here in attendance His Excellency Albin Kurti, Prime Minister of the Republic of Kosovo. Sir, a very warm welcome to you. We are so glad to have you on this panel, despite the fact that you are busy in other topics. Ich möchte Frau Abgeordnete Dr. Marie-Agde Strack-Zimmermann grüßen, Mitglied des Deutschen Bundestages und Vorsitzende des Verteidigungsausschusses des Deutschen Bundestages. Frau Abgeordnete, seien Sie uns herzlich willkommen. Wir freuen uns, heute mit Ihnen zu diskutieren. Moreover, I would like to welcome Michael Gahler, member of the European Parliament. He is in the Foreign Committee and is also a spokesperson for foreign matters of the European People's Party. Herr Gahler, herzlich willkommen. Ich hatte schon gesagt, wir beide kennen uns online von Veranstaltungen, die Sie für die RAG Brüssel durchführen. Ich freue mich, dass wir heute hier mit Ihnen live diskutieren können. And finally, I would like to welcome the President of the German Armed Forces Reservists Association, Professor Dr. Patrick Sensburg. Dear Patrick, before I will hand over the floor to you, may I provide some administrative hints to the audience. First of all, you have seen that there is an opportunity to provide your questions and remarks through a tool. And I'm sure that we will have another time instructions on the screen how you can do that. Please note as well that the event is recorded and that later on copies of the event will be provided on Facebook, on Instagram, and some other means provided and operated by the Armed Forces Reservists Organization. That's so far all I have to announce. Sorry, thank you. And I hand over to you, Patrick. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction. Before we start as quick as possible, I'd like to send a warm welcome to our Vice President, Thomas Erndl, who is a member of the German Parliament as well. He could be on the panel, but he's on another panel later on. So warm welcome to Thomas Erndl, who is here and listening to the discussion. So we should, as quick as possible, go into this discussion. And I would like to start with you, Mr. Prime Minister. First of all, before we go into the discussion about reserve and resilience, how is the situation in Kosovo?
In Kosovo, it's almost 1 year now that we are back in office, and we did manage quite well with the pandemic COVID-19. We are at the top of Western Balkan 6 in terms of low death rates and high vaccination rates. When I took office on March 2021, there were 0 vaccines, 0 contracts on vaccines, and no negotiations on contracts. We didn't take any vaccines from Russian Federation or China, only those verified by European EMA and American FDA. Other than that, also economy is doing well. According to Central Bank of Kosovo, we had a 9.9% of economic growth. Business turnover increased by 30% in comparison with previous year. Annual state budget by 12%. Exports by 2/3. Foreign direct investments by 53%. Tax revenues by 1/3, without changing fiscal policy. Because when people are hopeful, they rather spend than save. And when they see that government is fighting corruption and is uncorruptible itself, they are more ready to pay taxes. So all in all, we are doing well. But when it comes to relations with Serbia, things did not improve very much.
That would be my next question. How's the security situation?
Because they continue to in one hand, deny crimes committed during the war, and on the other hand, they do not want to recognize our independent country, meanwhile strengthening their links with Russian Federation.
Thank you very much. One last question before I go to Chairwoman Mrs. Strack-Zimmermann. Do you have a reserve in Kosovo?
We have 3,000 reserve in Kosovo because we managed to make law with amendments which enabled us to have 5,000 soldiers for Security Force of Kosovo and 3,000 as a reserve corpus. I think reserve is very important because you cannot talk and think of security without thinking of the future. And when it comes to security and defense, potentiality is not less important than actuality. And the reserve corpus plays exactly in that field. So we look forward to cooperate with NATO partners, Germany as well, in order to have better equipment and better training for our reserve corpus.
Quite interesting. And that gives me the chance to ask Chairwoman of the Defense Committee in the German Parliament, Mrs. Agnes Strack-Zimmermann. You noticed that also in Germany we're focusing a little bit more on the reserve in the last year. What's your position on reserve?
First of all, it's a great pleasure to meet you. And excuse me when I turned into German. You know, I feel a little bit more complicated, better in this situation, and not to be part of a new crisis. So, vielen Dank für die Einladung. Die Reserve wird in Zukunft eine deutlich stärkere Rolle spielen, glaube ich, als der ein oder andere bisher vor sich gesehen hat. Wir haben eine Bundeswehr, die personell nur begrenzt wachsen kann. Ich weiß, es wird immer darüber gesprochen, über 200.000 und mehr. Ich lasse das jetzt mal unkommentiert, aber ich glaube, dass wir in bestimmten Augenblicken die Reserve brauchen. Übrigens sieht man das auch hier bei der Munich Security Konferenz, wo ja sehr viele Reservistinnen und Reservisten einen tollen Job machen und man nur beim zweiten Hinsehen wahrnimmt, dass es Reservisten sind. Ich glaube, das ist ein sehr gutes Zeichen. Aber im Alltag brauchen wir sie. Aber ich glaube, es spielt auch eine Rolle, weil es immer den einen oder die andere gibt, die durchaus Vorbehalte haben, wenn es um Reserve geht, nach dem Motto, wer ist das? Sind die überhaupt ja, in der Realität im Thema? Dass ich auch glaube, dass es nicht nur eine Frage ist, zu sehen, dass Reservisten Übungen machen, also auf gut Deutsch schießen lernen, sondern dass sie auch im Thema, wenn ich das mal so sagen darf, unterrichtet werden, um zu sehen, dass sie ein wichtiger Teil der Bundeswehr sind und auch als solches eingesetzt werden könnten.
Thank you very much. So, as Mrs. Agnes Strack-Stimmermann pointed out already, that for Germany, the reserve plays an important role. We saw in Kosovo it did. I heard in other countries too. So from a European perspective, do you notice, Mr. Gala, in other European countries, do they all look to reserve? Is it like the German model, like what happened in Kosovo? I noticed in Romania they're looking on reserve, in the Baltic states. So what is your view on that?
Well, my impression is that there is, yes, everybody or many are looking, given the fact that there is the human potential is not big enough, the annual newcomers are not sufficient, and but there is not much coordination or looking what the neighbor does. So in many questions, I'm always arguing why there is no need for any harmonization, but there is perhaps a need for comparing notes, looking where is best practice, where can we make the best of the potential that we have got. And I'm pretty sure that especially countries who have a longer tradition and who are more around, like France, or well, now Britain is not in the EU anymore, but they are with us at NATO, so we shouldn't be shy to have a look there as well. There is a higher degree of activation or reactivation. There's also other things. There are people who have been in the army, then they go in the industry, and at some point they reappear again. Then, of course, as reservists, they're reactivated. So there is much more déjà vu of experts also than we afford. And I think, as I said, there is not one way only, but there is good argument to compare notes.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Let me just go back to Mrs. Agnes Strack-Zimmermann. So, what do you think, what kind of role Germany could play in this situation? We have the presidency of NRFC, which is a NATO reserve organization. We have the presidency of SEOR, which is in the NATO family, the reserve officers. So where do you see the German task for the next years? In Germany, with the reserve, and maybe international?
Naja, ich glaube, dass der Austausch von Bedeutung ist, was Sie gerade gesagt haben. Das wird ja nicht eine Einheit sein, europäisch, weil wir natürlich auch Freunde haben, wie die Franzosen oder in der NATO die Amerikaner, die natürlich eine ganz andere, kann ich es sagen, Manpower, Womanpower in die Armee stecken. Aber wir können natürlich angesichts der Krise schon vorbildhaft sein, die Reserve und die Männer und Frauen, die bereit sind, sich einzubringen, auch ernst zu nehmen. Und man muss nur dann genau definieren, wo. Also das ist natürlich von Bedeutung, das hat was mit Ausbildung zu tun, auch mit dem Alter der Einzelnen, wie lange sind sie aus der Praxis draußen, weil die Situation ist ja ernst genug und wir wollen ja hier nicht Menschen verheizen. Aber ich glaube, dass es gerade auch sozusagen backstage viele Möglichkeiten gibt. Es bestätigten mir auch die Bundeswehr, wo der ein oder andere oder die andere eingesetzt werden kann.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So a very bright and broad possibility to use reservists in different situations. But of course, the knowing that it's reservists and not 100% active soldiers 365 days a year. So the Kosovo perspective, you told us how many reservists you have. Where are you going? Are you increasing the number? Are you changing the training? What is your political agenda with the reservists? So on this platform you can tell us everything.
After changing the law on Kosovo Security Force, we have the right for 5,000 soldiers and 3,000 reservists. So it amounts to 60% of what is regular force in addition to that. We look forward to recruit these people from civil society, and in this way we want to match the challenges of the future, which are characterized by complexity and uncertainty. So in a world where autocracies have been rising in recent years, and where foreign policies are changing very fast, alliances and partnerships, we have to face the unpredictability of the future. That means that we must have a reserve for whatever comes in the near future, which we cannot foresee at present. So we can foresee that we will not be able to foresee. And I think the reservists are very important in this sense. On the other hand, we have increased by almost 100% budget for Kosovo Security Force. Mm-hmm. And we like to invest that in new military equipment, but also new trainings. And not only in combat capabilities in case of conflicts and wars, but also in case of natural disasters. We have seen wildfires during the summer, we have seen floods during the autumn and spring. We've seen the situation with the pandemic, with different kind of natural disasters, that we must be ready. And to this end, a reservist can be even more capable than ordinary soldiers. That's why we think that they are indispensable.
Do you have special fields where you recruit the reservists from? For example, here in Germany, we have a strong cyber reserve. We have a strong reserve in the medical issues. So we're recruiting on all parts, from all parts, but we have, of course, some very strong groups in the reserve. Is it the same in Kosovo, or?
I don't think that in Kosovo we have one specific group which could be like a hearth for recruitment. In Kosovo we have this great advantage of young population. So we are ancient people, but young population. And average age is 30 years. So I think that this is our greatest advantage.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot. Mr. Gala, as a member of the European Parliament and former, as I know, military attaché with a military background, or in the attaché branch?
No, well, I was in the Foreign Office for 9 years, but I was in the Bundeswehr only for 2 years.
Oh, okay.
So that's the background.
But 2 years is nice.
2 years is nice, yes. No, well, pre-financing of my studies, that was the motivation.
This is a generation, you know,
yeah?
It's a typical way.
Yeah.
It's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yes, 2 years, you have the chance to do the officer training and to finance the following studies.
But actually, I had only 2 reservists. I was only called twice in the years to come. I would have gone more, but at some point, I'm still amongst those years where there were a lot around, so they didn't need me apparently, and they, well, didn't come back.
But maybe today can change this.
Yes.
Because it's broadcasted, and maybe there are some generals looking.
No, I'm having my week as an MEP in August in Flensburg-Mürwik, so that's the next encounter. And I'm looking forward to that.
Wonderful. But let me ask one question. With your background, what do you think on the, let me say, as I try to, on the diplomatic agenda, how can the reserve help to understand each other? Because reservists come from all parts of the society. They interchange, they meet international. Is it also a chance of understanding?
Well, I would wish that such occasions were met. I mean, we don't have yet, to an extent possible probably, this on the, be it on the, I'm not so sure whether systematically, be it for the NATO headquarters or in the European Union sphere, whether in this regard soldiers or reservists from different countries are activated to work in such groupings in such fora, that could definitely be a way forward, I would say, that they find each other at a later stage of the professional career in what we, for instance, for the part of the European Union, what we are busy building up. I could imagine that experts that are needed with a technical background for the European Defence Agency, why should they not be activated for certain projects where they have perhaps earlier worked on, perhaps even in the professional industry, and then in this capacity then be hired for some months. And of course, all these European projects, as the name says, it's not from one country, what we do with EDA or in other circumstances. We have our training missions. We have always a shortage in all the CSDP missions, both in the military one, even more in the civilian part, because that's harder to recruit people. But in the military missions as well, there is a lack of availability. And I think that could be a very interesting area where many reservists who have in the meanwhile also international experience could be activated to serve in a training mission, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. The German perspective again. So I have the feeling sometimes in Germany it's very tricky and not easy to skip from political career to military career to career in business, and back it's even not possible anymore. One step is possible, but then we're very skeptic. But that's what was described before. That's then not possible in Germany. Or should we change our mentality that we need these people with experience in the military, in the business, and go back? Are we too little cowards in Germany?
Ich würde nicht sagen, dass es chaotisch ist, sondern es ist die Einstellung zum Militär. Ich erinnere mich, ich bin Jahrgang 58, meine Generation ist so gut wie komplett gezogen worden zur Wehrpflicht. Und auch Teile, also einer meiner Söhne ist noch gezogen worden, der nächste schon nicht mehr, weil der am Tag der Aussetzung der Wehrpflicht 18 wurde. Und damit war das nicht mehr akut. Ich erinnere mich, dass es durchaus, und ich sehe das auch bei mir, wenn sich jemand bei mir beworben hat, ich in der Vita geschaut habe, ob er gedient hat oder nicht. Also dass das durchaus jetzt nicht schlecht war. Es kam zugegebenermaßen ein bisschen darauf an, war er richtig im Saft oder saß er mehr auf einem Bürostuhl, wenn ich das mal so lässig sagen darf. Da gibt es ja auch Unterschiede. Der berühmte Heimschläfer war jetzt nicht das, was einen besonders erregte. Aber es spielte im Lebenslauf durchaus eine Rolle, ob man eine gewisse militärische Erfahrung hatte. Das ist heute ja nicht mehr so der Fall. Aber ich glaube, dass Deutschland, I think it's a difference to your country, eine sehr seltsame Beziehung oder Nichtbeziehung zu Soldaten, Soldatinnen haben. Es ist sehr gut, dass wir vor 2 Jahren die Möglichkeit eröffnet haben, dass Soldaten, Soldatinnen losgelöst, ob es grundsätzlich Berufs- und Zeitsoldaten sind, mit dem Zug fahren können, umsonst in Uniform. Dadurch sieht man jetzt wieder Militär am Freitag in die Richtung, am Sonntag zurückkehren. Das ist ein wichtiges Zeichen. Aber ich glaube, darüber müssen wir diskutieren, dass man sich nicht schämt in diesem Land, dass wir Soldaten, Soldatinnen haben. Im Gegenteil. Und ich glaube, wenn wir das in die Gesellschaft wieder hineinbringen, dann hat das Thema Reserve auch wieder einen anderen Spirit. Ich glaube, das ist ganz, ganz wichtig. Und angesichts der Situation, in der wir sind, Ukraine-Krise, Diskussion über den Mali-Einsatz, all diese Themen, die ja nun wirklich uns vor die Füße gefallen sind, vor allen Dingen das Thema, was passiert in der Ukraine, wird hoffentlich viele, vor allen Dingen junge Menschen sensibilisieren, dass es naiv ist zu glauben, in einem Land zu leben, was sich gerne neutral gibt, also Deutschland als große Schweiz, sondern dass wir eine schlagkräftige Armee haben müssen, dass wir willens sein müssen, diesen Kontinent auch mit Partnern zusammen zu verteidigen und dass es dazu auch ein gesellschaftliches Commitment braucht.
Thanks a lot. That makes quite clear which kind of process we have to go. Let me summarize this. To have a natural understanding of our forces and to have a natural and normal approach because of our history background. So that leads me to another question to you, Mr. Prime Minister. What do you expect, for example, from Germany?
I think it is very important to have continuation of German contingent within KFOR forces in Kosovo. NATO is very important for our security and defense. we want to join NATO, and the first milestone would be Adriatic Charter, A5. And internally speaking, Kosovo Security Force with KFOR troops is having a very good cooperation. We are learning a lot from each other. And this exchange of experience brings institutional cohesion. And the security architecture of our country benefits a lot. Since June 1999, when first German soldiers came to Kosovo, until today, we have no incident in our country, and people appreciate very much the engagement, the role, and the contribution of Germany for peace and security of Kosovo. We know very well, and it is quite often affirmed, the role of Germany for economy of Kosovo. We have huge diaspora in Germany. 400,000 Albanians from Kosovo live in Germany. They work here, they send remittances back home. But at the same time, we tend to forget the contribution of Germany for peace and security in our country. So I think that KFOR in Kosovo should always have a German contingent, and we just can see how we can increase cooperation with our plans to further develop and build up Kosovo security forces in two main aspects. One of them is general national resilience, and the other one is national response capabilities.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. That leads me to two questions. First question, Mrs. Agnes Strack-Zimmermann, will the new government that the Liberal Party is part of?
Thanks God. Sorry.
It's always good to be in government.
Always, I mean, yes, of course.
Well,
it's sometimes good to be part of the government.
Sometimes it's hard to be just the moderator.
Yeah. Okay.
But welcome that you're there. But will you stay with your contribution in Kosovo, that German troops will be part of the contingent of Kosovo? Because it was in discussion. If it's still a military contingent that we need there, do we need other contingents, more police-orientated? So will German troops be part of KFOR contingent in Kosovo in the future?
Also bevor ich jetzt eine Krise auslöse, lassen Sie mich diplomatisch antworten, was ich eigentlich ungern mache, dass natürlich diese Fragen auch, und haben Sie ja auch Koalitionserfahrungen, wenn ich das sagen darf, einer der Ihren Partner ist heute unser Partner, dass ich glaube, dass genau diese Themen angesichts dessen, was sich in Europa und darüber hinaus tut, dass das natürlich da diskutiert werden sollte. It's very diplomatic.
No, it's diplomatic, it's true. And as I was in Kosovo 2010, my heart is beating a bit for Kosovo. I think everybody who was there in different functions. Yeah. So I think it's a part of burden sharing that Germany does his part as well and can't just say others have to do it. And the ties, the connections are so good in the last years. Because if you see how many soldiers served in Kosovo, and they are now reservists, by the way, and they still have these ties. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's also good. And I think from the European perspective, with the other contingents for Austria, for example, and Italy, it could be the same. So what is the European perspective? Well, how do you look on Kosovo? There's a European mission as well.
No, we definitely need a commitment from our side. I mean, there are still some countries missing to recognize Kosovo as independent. I think behind the scenes there are some good positive developments, hopefully, with those still missing. I hope so. But the commitment, of course, when there is a diverse and perhaps, given the Serbian attitude, the more assertive one, perhaps even a need to upgrade it in size. The same, by the way, I would argue for Bosnia with Altea, where I see a danger that is not a direct relation with reserve, but perhaps we can only fill it up or enlarge it with the help of reservists in Bosnia. When I see a certain link to these negative developments with Ukraine and with Republika Srpska and this secessionist agenda that there is existing. Perhaps the Russians are pushing Dodik in this direction in parallel to distract our attention or to cause us additional trouble. And I don't know whether, I mean, I followed, of course, at the border Kosovo and Serbia, the events that have taken place there. Suddenly Russian representatives were there on the side of on the Serbian side. I really wonder what their task was there. And so far, I think there is potentially a need to upgrade that. And then we are quickly perhaps have to use the human resources for those who have a link to Kosovo, that perhaps for them it should be the ones who could show up first. By the way, I don't know, I'm not aware, how is the mechanism? Is there a sort of a focal point inside the BMVG in the ministry where a reservist can say, hey, I'm available and I could be available especially for this task? Is there something like that, a platform, a focal point to make best use? If that exists, fine. If not, perhaps it is something to suggest.
Maybe I can answer this.
Yes.
As president of the Reserve Association. Of course, every reservist is asked if he wants to go also into the missions. And then he can, of course, tell this would be my mission. I want to be part of a UN mission, for example, which are a bit different, like observer missions like we have in South Sudan, for example. Or, for example, in Kosovo, we have special ones who served many times in Kosovo because they have special knowledge, capabilities. So they've been there 3, 4, 5 times in Kosovo. That's possible. So we've been asked, and that's been done. But maybe we could improve that, because I think, especially in Kosovo, it's very interesting for reservists to serve there. Some have even family ties to the region. So let me, in between, ask the audience to send us questions to the podium. We already saw 2 questions that we maybe can discuss right now. And if further questions come, we could ask the further questions, or we can go on with these discussions. So the first question goes to Mr. Gala. What role do the reserve forces play regarding the EU battle groups? What role do reserve forces play in the EU's strategic compass?
Well, for the first question, well, the EU battle groups, that is an issue. I just saw Carl Bildt down in the conference, the former Swedish both Prime Minister and Foreign Minister. I recall when he appeared already 15 years ago in our committee, he asked, I want to see that they exist. So actually, there is the only mechanism that exists. It's a rotation. Every 6 months, 1 or 2 member states are in a rotation responsible for that, and it has become increasingly difficult to fill these. Even I'm told, so to say, volunteers, as we are never using it. I'm pretty sure that these units that are assigned in a rotational way, that there is no specific relevance for reservists. If one pops up there, perhaps accidentally, but not, I think, not deliberately, because it is so non-operational. You simply, for 6 months, you get a certain label, and then, of course, hopefully they have a higher degree of standby and possibility, but they have never been called for. I would rather have an option to think of what Mr. Borrell suggested, this rapid deployment force, these 5,000 people, where I would wish that we would have the courage as European Union, as member states, of course, who have to provide it, not to have it, so to say, built on the battle groups and then, so to say, have a bit more a size of a brigade. But my suggestion would definitely be, and as I said, there could be reservists coming in, to have that as a standing 5,000 people force being put together from the member states. We define what we need, and everybody who is able to contributes a bit, and then they are stationed together, trained together permanently, have their language courses permanently, and then when there is a need, they can be used, and not then that the high rep would have to go on the phone with the member states. Couldn't you give us somebody? And so that would be for me an idea. First of all, to have this rapid deployment force in the given size, stationed together, training together, and make use of reservists indeed, in order not to, perhaps it's an easier way than easier access to an extent for member states to accept it, because everything is scarce in the active force. But apart from, so to say, the real backbone of that, that should be, of course, the professional ones that might be added up by reservists, also in a rotation way, to keep people busy and up to date. But we are not there yet.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. The question was just to Mr. Gahler. But EU battle groups maybe concern all of us. If you have statements to EU battle groups, it's your chance. I don't want to cut somebody out.
Ich schaue schon auf die
Oh,
zweite
we go to the second question
Yeah.
already. Okay, so the second question, maybe I would also say something to it. But first of all, members of Parliament, the defense budgets are always tight. Many investments are planned. Don't you need to expect reserve budgets cut first? How to cope with this problem? So we have a position as Reserve Association, of course. We think that the money you spend for the reserve is very good spent, because the turnaround, let me say that way, is high, because you have lots of engagement, not just because of the money, it's voluntarily. They do their service also when they are not part of the troops. They train, they do everything, and then you have highly motivated, trained, and with a civil expertise soldiers. So it's good spent money. But you're in the government, Mrs. Strack-Zimmermann.
Ich würde das gerne beantworten, weil da steht, the defense budget is always tight. Also es ist in den letzten Jahren auch unter Regierungsbeteiligung CDU, SPD ja kontinuierlich gestiegen und ist bei 50 Milliarden. Das würde ich nicht als tight bezeichnen. Das Problem, was wir haben, dass wir das Geld nicht auf die Straße bekommen, dass die Beschaffungsprozesse zu kompliziert, zu langsam sind. Also es ist nicht nur eine Frage des Geldes, wenngleich wir wissen, dass die Herausforderungen, die anstehen, natürlich auch entsprechende Mittel erforderlich machen und dass viele Investitionen geplant sind. In der Tat allein die Tornado-Nachfolge, bewaffnete Drohnen, was wir ja jetzt auf den Weg bringen. Ich sehe nicht, dass wir das Budget für die Reserve kürzen. Im Gegenteil, jetzt bin ich mal parteiisch. Gerade wir als Freie Demokraten in der Opposition haben uns immer, und da war auch mein Kollege Christian Sauter, der ich Mitglied des Parlaments, den ich da explizit auch nennen möchte, sehr engagiert. Erstens, dass es mehr Mittel gibt für die Reserve, aus den Gründen, die Sie gesagt haben. Es ist ein gut investiertes Geld. Und deswegen wird es diesbezüglich kein Problem geben. Die Frage wird sein, wie wird das Budget verwendet? Sie sprachen gerade von Ausbildung und Sie sprachen gerade, dass viele Erfahrungen im Kosovo haben. Wobei ich natürlich sage, dass das ist jetzt meine Generation, die Erfahrung im Kosovo hatte, das sind jetzt nicht die 20-Jährigen oder 30-jährigen Reservisten, sondern die dürften 50 plus sein, korrigieren Sie mich, ja, 40, eher 50 plus. Das heißt, dass da natürlich auch ich will jetzt hier keinem zu nahe treten, eine körperliche Veränderung stattfindet. Das ist so. Das heißt, in Ausbildung, Training, was Sie gerade gesagt haben, zu investieren, ist das eine, aber natürlich auch auf den Altersdurchschnitt zu schauen. Und deswegen wird die Frage sein, wen von denen, die interessiert sind, schickt man wohin? Das ist ja auch eine Realität. Insofern nein, es wird nicht weniger Geld geben, also definitiv nicht. Wir haben auch in den Koalitionsvertrag explizit geschrieben, es ist ein Satz, er ist aber sehr wichtig, dass wir die Reserve stärken wollen. Also insofern bin ich da völlig klar, da wird nicht dran gegangen.
So with this clear statement for the reserve, for the budget
Absolutely.
of the reserve, you're always welcome in the next year on any
Yes,
panel,
okay.
any podium.
It was a
in the
chance
Reserve
to come
Association.
back.
Before I come to you, Mr. Prime Minister, let me put a little bit water in the wine. I heard with a very good feeling what Mrs. Agnes Strack-Zimmermann said. The budget is not tight. We have to look how invest the money. But compared to other European countries, we are far away from the so-called 2% target. So how do you look on Germany from the European perspective? Do we have to do more, or are we good on track?
Well, first of all, it's a NATO target, but interesting enough, the European Parliament, in our resolutions, we have taken this over. So we have we are on this same 2% platform. I mean, of course, we all know that it's not only the formal 2%. By the way, they are, if we have a COVID crisis and have a decrease of 4% in our annual growth rate, a minus, then all of a sudden we are getting better. So it is, of course, I think it's a guideline that we should strive for. And as the largest European Union country and largest European NATO country, we also do not only have to live up to what we have promised in the Wales summit in 2014, but we have also a role to play as an idol, as a Vorbild. Yeah, and not only to say, well, let's see how to muddle through and interpret this and that in whatever direction. I think the others are looking on us, and so far there is a point. But indeed, at the end, it's actually also what will be used and where is the preparedness to deliver. And then when it becomes concrete for a concrete mission, they don't ask, is it because you fulfilled or did not fulfill the 2%? It's a political will that it needs to be attached that is perhaps more important than a mere figure. And still, as I said, we have, as the largest country in Europe, in this regard, we have to serve by example in so far.
Mr. Prime Minister, am I allowed to ask you two questions? First of all, how is your budget? What do you do? And how do you spend the money? I mean the defense budget, just the defense budget. And second question, how do you look on the debate in Germany? I think you followed these 2% debate in Germany. How is your impression? The number is high. We're not spending just a few euros on the budget, but of course, concerning the GDP, it's not 2%. How is your impression from an outside view, diplomatic?
First of all, in Kosovo, this year we're spending 1.3% of our GDP for defense. We have increased the budget for defense, and it's still 1.3%. We look forward to reach 2%, and we are aiming there. But we cannot do it immediately because we have to increase capacities and capabilities and with a certain timetable get to 2%. We want to join NATO one day, sooner better, but we also have there 4 non-recognizers, 1 less than for EU. On the other hand, we believe that some of the military engagements of Germany internationally have proven that Germany contributes a great deal to global security. And in this sense, I think that people expect outside of Germany from Germany more than before. So perhaps in 21st century, people expect more presence of German defense and security forces around the world, and especially for European continent. We have to be careful with the situation with Russian Federation, since they are trying to use different also non-state actors within EU soil for destabilization. Now that EU is trying to build up energy independence from Russian gas, slowly but certainly. Apparently, it seems that the only comparative advantage of Russian Federation remains the army. That's why we have to be vigilant and careful, all of us. And I think that also Germany has huge GDP, so 2%, I know it's a lot. But nonetheless, I believe it should try to aim that, because sustainable development and sustainability of the progress depends on one hand from taking care of the environment, but also from the fact that people who work must feel safe and secure, also in geopolitical respect, and they must feel that the products the fruits, the results of their labor will be safe and secure. So in this sense, sustainability has to do with both environment but also security.
One short question, because I thought about when you told something about the influence of Russia. Do you have veteran groups in Kosovo that are influenced by Russia? Do you have groups like paramilitary groups or veterans?
In Kosovo, you cannot find Kosovar citizens who would be willing to engage in any kind of communication, let alone cooperation with the Russian Federation. We are absolutely skeptic.
Also the Serbs, the Serbian minority?
But illegal structures of Serbia, they might be influenced by Russian Federation, and we are very much worried, and we're following the situation carefully with our intelligence service and security sector in order not to allow that anything which happened in Bosnia with Republika Srpska and Dodik takes place in Kosovo. We know very well that President Putin got into power only 2 months after liberation of Kosovo, became prime minister in Moscow, and he annexed South Ossetia and Abkhazia in Georgia in the same year when we declared independence. So there is no month passing without him mentioning us. So in this sense, we are very concerned, but not in terms of population, but only elements of illegal structures of Serbia.
Because when you build up a reserve or strengthening the reserve, it should be the reserve of Kosovo, based on the constitution, based on fundamental rights, citizenships and things like that, and democracy. I think that's very important. That's very important for the reserve in Germany, that reservists know why they are reservists.
Yes.
On the fundament on our constitution, that's very important, especially for Germany with its history. So I think it's important for every country, because you have trained soldiers there. Maybe they don't have weapon at home like in Switzerland, but they have some special capabilities, knowledge, and you have to take care of it.
Just one thing, if I may add, in September last year, when we had this tension at the northern border crossing with Serbia regarding reciprocity of car plates, Russian ambassador to Belgrade, Mr. Alexander Bochan-Harchenko, came together at the border crossing with Minister of Defense of Serbia, Mr. Stefanovic, and they were inspecting a massing of Serbian troops, military equipment and armored vehicles, and a fighter jet, MiG-29, was in the air. They've gotten 14 MiG-29s, 8 donations from Belarus, and 6 from Russian Federation. When we had this tension, I at most appeared with my Minister of Internal Affairs, never with my Minister of Defense. But Serbia always appeared with the Ministry of Defense at the forefront, treating it as a war issue. And I think this has to do also with the fact that last year, in mid-October, they have participated in what they called Slavic Shield, a military exercise. Whereas we, as the Republic of Kosovo, participated in Defender Europe 21 from March to June last year with 330 soldiers, and we were among 16 hosting countries. And we will also participate in Defender 23.
That's nice. So from our side, also reservists are taking part in the Defender, because it's a typical issue and task for reservists to guide troops to your home country. But let me ask the European Parliament to point it out that way. Is the European Parliament discussing these issues? And if I think so, what's the position on European Parliament? Because EP was involved a lot in Kosovo. But we are all looking on KFOR. I can understand that, at reservists and soldiers do, but EU also playing a role and a part.
Well, we are, as a parliament or as the Subcommittee on Security and Defense, we are in contact with Euromil, that is the organization of the soldiers' associations. And I think in Euromil are the reservist organizations also in Euromil. I'm not 100% sure, but it would perhaps on the European level make sense that the active ones and the reservists join forces in order to present their points, because the issue there has been especially when soldiers are in a common EU mission somewhere, that the same rules apply, yeah? and that they don't find themselves in the same spot guarding or fighting or whatever they do under different circumstances. Yeah? Some get the best treatment in medication, others the standard one, and salary-wise these are issues and security assurances and all these things. They are not, of course, harmonized, but if somebody is in the field in a common action, I think the same rules should apply. And we, of course, on the European level, together with Euromil, we would then say the highest standards. I mean, nobody should apply and available standards, because nobody would volunteer, and certainly not a reservist, when he has the feeling he or she goes into such a in an exercise or in a mission and finds him or herself in a worse situation than in normal life. So such issues are being addressed, but not so systematic as this discussion that we are conducting here now. But there is room for that. I had an interesting example, for instance, that people who are employed in the European institutions, and there are thousands from all our member states, at least for the German case, until recently, I hope it has been resolved, as soon as you work in Brussels, in whatever capacity, be it in the public or in one of the lobbyists, you lose your residence, your prime residence in Germany, and then you automatically fell out. You could not be called anymore when you apply and have no prime residence in Germany. You could not become or get hired for that. I hope that has been. I know it has been addressed. I hope it has been resolved. There's at least some potential in the huge, well, not only German-speaking or German community in Brussels to not to frustrate such people that because they are sitting in Brussels lose this possibility to get activated.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a good hint. We'll, as an association, look for that. I will take care for that. And I can see we have further questions. And before I come to the next question, maybe I announce that also comrades that served in Kosovo can ask questions. So even this topic can be a little bit focused while we have the chance to have the Prime Minister here. It's a special situation, so I hope more and more questions will come soon. The next question goes to Mrs. Strack-Zimmermann. Which role will reserve units perform in local home defense in hybrid warfare? Will more units be needed?
Das ist eine Fangfrage. Wenn mir jetzt jemand gegenüber säße, würde ich noch mal nachfassen, und zwar Local Home Defense in Hybrid Warfare. Es gibt ja Grundgesetz, was klar sagt, dass in Deutschland, im Inland, die Bundeswehr bzw. entsprechende Reservisten in Uniform nicht präsent sind, sondern wir die Polizei haben, die die innere Sicherheit gewährleistet, denn ein hybrider Kampf kann ja auch bedeuten, dass man uns versucht, über Kommunikation zu beeinflussen und sozusagen die Gesellschaft von innen heraus auszuhöhlen. Und da gibt es eine klare Regelung, dass da die Polizei gefragt ist, wenn das in diese Richtung geht. Wenn es als Beispiel jetzt in der Frage der Hilfe, da wo die Bundeswehr auch grundgesetzmäßig unterwegs ist und auch sein darf, in der Frage, als wir die schrecklichen Hochwasser hatten, wo die Bundeswehr und auch Reservisten eine Rolle gespielt haben, da ist das dann nochmal ein anderes Thema. Aber wir müssen aufpassen, dass wir da sehr sauber sind und da auch keine Grenzen verschieben. Ansonsten alles, was die Verteidigung nach außen betrifft, glaube ich, sollte man auch genau definieren, wo kann man Reservisten hinzuziehen, wo ist es möglich und dann immer auch unter, was ich am Anfang sagte, immer unter der Prämisse der Körperlichkeit, was sind die Betreffenden, es dürften überwiegend Herren sein, in der Lage auch zu leisten. Aber eben auch, dass gewährleistet ist, dass Training eben nicht nur bedeutet an der Waffe, sondern dass auch eingebettet sein muss, dass wir ein Grundgesetz haben, davon gehe ich aus, aber ich betone es nochmal, und dass eben Soldaten, Soldatinnen eben da eine wichtige Vorbildfunktion auch haben, auf Basis des Grundgesetzes aktiv zu sein. Es ist immer der Nachteil, wenn man eine Frage bekommt und sie mehrmals liest, um nicht...
And sometimes you can't ask what this means or that means, but I would say from the perspective of the Reserve Association, 100% right. But I have just to mention one thing. We have very strong female reservists.
Ah, okay.
Yes, because the German forces changing step by step. It needs some time. And we are a little bit behind because reservists were active soldiers, they go out. So with our percentage of female reservists, we are a little
How many percent do you have?
I can't say 100%, I can just say members in the association, so I can't have an overview about all. But it's an increasing number and they are quite strong.
Of course.
Yeah, and then we have some very, very good marching leader who's Kapitän zur See.
Yes.
She's in her civil life, she's a police officer in Berlin. And she served, she was in a mission also. And now she's leading a group of ones who are doing marches, like Nijmegen March and things like that. And she's one of the strongest. And
Yes,
so,
but it's an old story. It's, we have to know it. If women are...
contributes, then they do it 100%.
If they contribute, they do it 100%.
Okay, so I will ask you questions in this direction also, but let me see and look at the next question. So, it is getting harder and harder to motivate people to engage voluntarily. What incentives can be given to attract people to the reserve forces, and how can volunteers be kept motivated through all ages? So how do you do it in Kosovo? Is it a question of payment? Is it a question of serving the country? How do you get reservists in Kosovo?
People of Kosovo are very patriotic, and I think that helps a great deal. And they, in addition, like to get together, work together, because this community feeling, this togetherness, can be achieved through voluntary work. But at the same time is the benefits that you get in terms of knowledge and new experience. I believe that once we will have this contingent of 3,000 reservists in our security forces, we can also link it with medical health sector, with police. But at the same time, I think we can do it with certain faculties of the university. So army is a place where you learn not just by doing, but also by reading and listening to lectures and studying and discussing with others. Definitely now, nations which are progressing, people and societies which are building up and developing are those which are paying a lot of attention to knowledge, to technological innovation and to knowledge, where people who learn more perform better. And I think that security forces in general and reservists in particular can help a great deal in this respect as well.
Thank you. So Kosovo is doing the things we talked about since years. If you do a course at the military, it's hardly to go with a certificate to the civil employers and say, I've done this wonderful course at the Führungsakademie in Hamburg or wherever, I learned this, I learned that.
Yeah.
Sometimes even driving license are not recognized. So we're doing this, and military German armed forces doing a wonderful job, but sometimes they don't show. How can we in Germany help these wonderful volunteer engagement, and how can we tell people, you benefit from them? How would you answer the question, Mrs. Strack-Zimmermann?
Sprechen Sie von Volunteer, das was gerade eingeführt worden ist? Oder generell, es gibt ja eine neue Möglichkeit, sich zu performen.
Eigentlich alle. Alle Reservisten machen es ja freiwillig.
Ja. Ja, weil die Bundeswehr ja jetzt auch sozusagen einen Schnellkurs anbietet, wenn ich das mal so salopp sagen darf. Heimatschutz, das sehen wir sehr kritisch, weil wir glauben, dass es mehr Kräfte bindet, als das Benefit letztlich daraus ist. Aber kann man sehr lange drüber diskutieren, ist ja auch sozusagen den Wahlkampf vor Augen. Eine Vorfelddiskussion gewesen, ob es wieder eine Wehrpflicht geben könnte. Das sehe ich nicht, aus vielen Gründen, vor allen Dingen auch aus wirtschaftlichen Gründen, aber geschenkt. Ich glaube, dass gerade gesagt wurde, dass man besonders patriotisch ist, dass man auch bereit ist, in den Kampf zu gehen. Das ist ja eine Aussage, in Deutschland nie diese Rolle gespielt hat, weil wir das Gefühl hatten, nur von Freunden umringt zu sein, also diesen täglichen Angriff Gott sei Dank nicht erleben mussten. Das prägt natürlich auch das Kosovo, das prägt auch andere Länder, wo sie immer wieder der Gefahr unmittelbar ausgesetzt sind. Es kann einen Krieg geben, eine Auseinandersetzung. Das schärft natürlich das Gefühl. Ich glaube, dass als Johannes Rau Bundespräsident war, 20 Jahre her, er sagte ja einmal aus seiner eigenen Kriegserfahrung der Generation, wie glücklich wir sein können, dass wir von Freunden umzingelt seien. Das war gut gemeint, aber ich glaube, das hat einen fatalen Auslöser gehabt in die Bevölkerung, dass wir im Herzen Europas leben und alles ist gut, dass wir keine Probleme mit Grenznachbarn haben und wir uns auch sehr wohl gefühlt haben in dieser Situation. Jetzt merken wir, dass diese Welt, dass wir nicht im Warmen sitzen und um uns herum passieren Dinge, sondern dass wir auch Teil der Lösung des Problems sein müssen, weil die NATO es erwartet, Europa es erwartet und weil wir schon aus eigenem Interesse es machen müssen. Und in diesem Kontext spielt die Reserve eine große Rolle. Und ich glaube, dass die jungen Menschen, wenn ich heute auch mit Schülern, Schülerinnen spreche, die 20 oder 15, 16, 17, 18 Jahre alt sind oder jungen Studentinnen und Studenten, das Gefühl dafür, dass man möglicherweise wirklich auch für sein Land nicht nur intellektuell da sein muss, sondern auch physisch, dass das in der Generation mit Sicherheit wieder reift angesichts der Situation, in der wir heute leben. Man muss ja nur den Fernseher anschalten, um zu sehen, was um uns herum passiert.
Yes, and we saw it that this motivation is in the reserve. Also, when there were natural disasters like a flood or Corona, COVID, nearly 30,000 reservists came and said, "I'm here, I can help. Here I am. Do you need my data? I will do something for my country when you call me." So it's a great motivation that we keep in mind, that people want to serve, they want to do something. So from the European perspective, should that mean we should think more about incentives, not each country by country? We have the chance to bring the European idea also into reservists who want to serve. For example, if they do their duty, why not do more exchange? Is it just bilateral because it's military, because it's not in the acquis communautaire of the European Union? Is it the last remaining pillar of the Maastricht Treaty?
No, I would definitely open up and be very creative in this regard, and we should find ways and means to have such exchange. I mean, if it's not for all at the same time, many things start bilaterally or trilaterally. I mean, we have created structures where even when parts of the Dutch army are under German command, and the other way around, we have some navy. I think we got to them, and if there are reservists involved, I mean, they could also live it. I think we should also foresee, of course, for all European missions or for all CSDP missions, we should foresee a European order, so to say, that they have made it so that will be rewarded at the end of such a common thing. And I see, at least from other countries, on the uniforms of the people who are there, how much they have already done. So that is something to be rewarding people for an extra service, that is something that motivates. I mean, also what would motivate, of course, if with every reservist activity that you are getting a promotion, so a higher ranking, and perhaps that could also be more flexibilized. It need not always perhaps have reservists, what is it, Planstelle in English or so, but simply an honorary. Earlier we had honorary colonels, yeah, without a Planstelle attached or something like that. So to promote people, or as you said, in uniform, as long as you're in uniform, you're allowed to travel for free in the Deutsche Bahn. Perhaps for a reservist, it makes sense if he or she have a month as a reservist or 2 months, and then they get the double time extra afterwards, also for free ticket. I mean, it's banal things that motivate people. Perhaps, I mean, easygoing, not costing that much. That could be creative ways to make it simply more attractive.
So, lots of ideas we have to talk about. We have one last question and we have to look on the time because our panelists have to go to other panels or discussions. And it's the final panel of the whole conference, so we have to look a little bit on the time. One last question I see from our audience, and it's about Kosovo. So, what will be the biggest challenge for Kosovo when it comes to security and foreign policy in the foreseeable future? How can Germany support? And then we can ask if Germany can contribute this.
Can deliver.
In terms of security and foreign policy, I think that the most important thing is, in one hand, Serbia to change its course away from Moscow towards EU, and finally acknowledge that recognizing independence of Kosovo helps a great deal also Serbia, not only Kosovo, and brings great boost to the security and peace in the region. To this end, I believe Germany can help a great deal because being a pillar and motor of EU has a lot of leverage over Serbia. And on the other hand, we would need help from Germany in our security and defense sector in order to be able to combat different illegal activities and structures, since quite often organized crime, which is cross-border in Western Balkan 6, is very much linked with non-democratic political forces and politicians. So it is important to fight organized crime and corruption, and we have done some great work with our new government. For example, in 1 year, we have had 1,086 police operations. And we have managed to confiscate the highest amount of drugs, narcotics, than in every other year since declaration of independence. So uncorrupted government with well-educated ministers who are middle-class people and don't look after getting rich from politics, because we think that politics is essentially a service, can also have great results in fighting corruption and organized crime, which again I'm emphasizing is very much linked with autocratic political leaders who extract from public funds private wealth for their close circle.
Thank you. One brief answer also. Can the German government contribute this? Is Kosovo high on the scene?
I mean, it's not.
The last question I will leave to you.
I would definitely say it's not a German-specific thing. I mean, from the European Union side, we really look at this problematic of transborder organized crime in the Western Balkans, because it affects us all. So I wouldn't say that there is a specific. I mean, if we have experts, we should do it within the framework of the European Union. That is where we have the overview. also trans-border-wise. We had a report recently in the European Parliament on organized crime in the Western Balkans. And it's indeed, as you said, there is this linkage between the organized crime and corrupted political structures, very strong. And, well, I won't call names now, but they are known. And insofar, there is a real challenge, and that is part of also pre-accession commitments. I mean, there has to be concretely a fight against all that. And if policymakers are part of the problem, a name and shame is not enough, but consequences have to be taken. And I think we should be very aware of that, very vigilant. And also we have our best leverage is the money that we give. And that is a discussion that we are very, especially also with regard to Bosnia-Herzegovina, because there are such, among other countries in the region, there are really problems in this regard. And we have this possibility to open and close our money flow and should not give it unconditionally just for the sake of keeping them on board of this pre-accession course.
Thank you very much for this high-ranked panel. So we found out reserve is important. Armed forces can't do their duty without reserve. And we found out you have lots of friends here in Germany for Kosovo, and especially for you. Thank you very much that you were all on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, thanks to all our audience who wrote lots of questions. If there are questions that we couldn't answer, we could do it later on via email. Thank you very much.
So.